Somewhere between one breath and the next, the world begins to soften. You're lying in the dark, perhaps with the quiet weight of the day still pressing lightly on your chest. Thoughts drift in and out like slow clouds, unfinished conversations, little worries, the endless list of things to do. It's normal to feel crowded inside your own mind at night, as if your thoughts are too big for the quiet room they're in. But tonight, instead of trying to push anything away, we will simply shrink. Not in a frightening way, not in a way that takes you out of yourself, but in a way that lets the edges of the world grow gently smaller. We'll leave behind streets and buildings, screens and schedules, and walk together into a softer dimension, down into a universe so small it becomes almost impossible to imagine. A place where a single human hair is a skyscraper, and dust is a mountain, and the true architecture of reality hums quietly in spaces we cannot see. This is the realm of nanotechnology, not just tiny machines and shining particles, but the secret scale where your own body, your own brain, is already at work. Somewhere deep in the mind, ions slip through channels thinner than a whisper. Proteins fold themselves like patient origami, and memories trace their first faint lines across synapses only billionths of a meter apart. In this story, we won't hurry. We'll float from image to image like a slow river at night, visiting the most soothing, wonder-filled facts about the nanoscale world. We'll watch colors bloom from invisible crystals, see medicine drift like gentle lanterns through the bloodstream, and feel the quiet intelligence of matter as it assembles itself into life. As you listen, there's nothing you have to remember, nothing you have to understand. You can let these images wash past like distant stars seen from a train window. All that matters is the feeling that somewhere beneath your skin, within your brain, and under the surface of everything you touch, a tiny, patient universe is keeping you company, and it has always known how to rest. Imagine for a moment that you are simply lying here. The room holds you like a gentle rectangular shell. Walls, ceiling, floor. The quiet geometry of your own little universe for the night. Perhaps there is a soft glow from a hallway, or the faint outline of furniture against the darker blue of the wall. The distance from one side of the room to the other is something your body understands immediately. You could cross it in a few slow steps. It feels familiar, human-sized, safe. You know this scale so well, you rarely notice it. The length of your bed, the stretch of your arm, the width of your hand. These are the units your days are built from. Cups and pillows, laptops and doorways, sidewalks and streets. The world at this size feels solid, knowable, almost ordinary, even when your mind feels like a storm. Tonight, we will not run from that storm. We will simply step away from it, one gentle step at a time, down a staircase of size into a quieter world. If you like, you can slowly bring your attention to one hand, the one closest to the edge of the mattress, or resting on your chest, or tucked under your cheek. You don't have to move it. Just imagine its outline. The curve of the knuckles, the way the fingers nest together. Your hand is maybe 10 centimeters across, about the width of a small book. A distance you could cross with your fingertips in less than a second. But we are going to cross it differently. Let's begin to imagine the same hand, only larger in your mind, as if your awareness is leaning in closer and closer, like a camera slowly zooming. The back of the hand fills your inner vision. The creases become faint rivers. The fine hairs, small forests. A single fingerprint ridge, a winding road. Now we shrink again. We come down to the width of a single fingertip, just a few millimeters across. Already this familiar landscape is becoming something else. The tiny lines on your skin are more pronounced, like soft canyon walls. The pores are no longer invisible, they are wells, small openings in the terrain. Another step. We move toward one single strand of hair. If your eyes were open, it might look like almost nothing. A faint line catching a glint of light. Yet that hair is thick enough, wide enough, that if we place it on our staircase of size, it is still enormous compared to where we are going. A human hair is tens of thousands of nanometers wide. But for now, don't worry about the number. Let the idea drift past like a leaf in a slow river. Just know this: if we keep shrinking, the hair that once seemed so fine will become a vast pillar beside us, like a tree trunk, then a skyscraper, then something so huge that it sinks beyond the horizon. Step by soft step, we move down. You might imagine that each step makes us 10 times smaller. You don't have to hold on to that exactly. Just feel the rhythm of it. 10 times smaller, and then 10 times smaller again, each step a small exhale of scale. At first, the world changes gradually. Furniture becomes distant. Fibers in your sheets turn into tangled ropes. Dust becomes boulders resting in the folds of fabric. But as we cross a certain threshold, something begins to shift more deeply. The air itself, which once felt like almost nothing, begins to thicken. The empty spaces between things reveal that they are not really empty at all. This is where the word nano waits for us, like a signpost written in gentle, glowing letters. Nano. A nanometer. A billionth of a meter. If a meter is the length of your outstretched arms, then a nanometer is like breaking that distance into a billion tiny pieces and holding just one. It is so small that the thickness of a sheet of paper is made of tens of thousands of them stacked together. So small that if you were to walk the width of a hair at this scale, it would feel like crossing a continent. Somewhere deep in this invisible realm, your fingernails grow, not in millimeters or centimeters, but in little nudges of nanoscale construction, layer upon careful layer, cell by cell, molecule by molecule. In the time it takes to inhale and to exhale and to feel your chest rise gently and fall again, your body has added countless nanometers of new material to itself, quietly, without asking you for permission or attention. You don't have to keep track of these distances. You don't have to picture them perfectly. Just feel the idea that beneath your everyday size, there is another world, softer and smaller, humming along all the time. In this world, atoms are the quiet seeds. Each atom is a tiny center of mass, surrounded by a cloud of probability where its electrons might be, like a faint, shimmering mist around a dark, silent stone. They are not hard marbles in a box, the way we sometimes imagined them in school. They are more like little patterns, small knots in the fabric of existence, each with its own gentle personality of charge and mass. Atoms meet each other and form molecules, like dancers who find a comfortable step together. 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom clasp hands, and suddenly there is water, a molecule shaped like a bent letter with a slight imbalance of charge that makes it love and cling and flow in the most interesting ways. You are made of these dancers, of water molecules and carbon frameworks, of nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur, of metals in tiny amounts, all woven into an immense dynamic pattern. And much of this weaving happens at the nanoscale, far below the reach of your eyes and fingertips. Here, you might imagine atoms lining up into lattices, tidy rows and columns that make up crystals. In a grain of salt, at this size, you would walk along streets of sodium and chloride, repeating like a pattern of tiles on an endless kitchen floor. In a piece of diamond, carbon atoms each hold hands with 4 friends, making a 3-dimensional web so strong that it becomes one of the hardest substances we know. Molecules brush past each other at this level, with the slow grace of dancers underwater. But do not be fooled, what would look slow to you is incredibly fast to them. They vibrate, twist, collide and part again, each motion a tiny note in a vast chemical symphony that keeps your cells alive. You might wonder, lying here in the dark, how we could possibly know any of this. How we could see something so small, so far beneath the limits of our naked eyes. For a long time, humans couldn't. The nanoscale was a blind country. We saw its effects, the shimmer of iridescent wings, the strength of spider silk, the clarity of crystal, but not the land itself. It was as if we had heard the music, but never seen the instruments. Then, slowly, we began to invent new ways of looking. The first step was the microscope, bending light through glass to magnify the very small. Yet even light has limits. Its waves can only resolve details down to a certain size, like trying to distinguish two birds sitting very close together in a distant tree. Below a certain distance, the two blur into one. To go smaller, we had to learn a different kind of seeing. Imagine an old friend running their fingertips across a surface in the dark, reading the tiniest changes, a scratch, an engraving, a raised letter. This is the feeling behind the scanning probe microscopes, the instruments that trace the nanoscale world as if they are reading a kind of braille written in atoms. One of them, the scanning tunneling microscope, uses a needle so sharp that its tip narrows down almost to a single atom. It hovers just above a surface, never quite touching, and a delicate flow of electrons passes between them, tunneling through the tiny gap. As the tip moves, this electron flow changes depending on the distance, and the instrument gently adjusts the height to keep the signal steady. By recording how much it must move up or down, the microscope slowly builds a map, a landscape of hills and valleys at the atomic scale. Not a photograph in the way we usually think of one, but a trace, a feeling, like fingertips learning the curvature of an invisible sculpture. Another tool, the atomic force microscope, lets a tiny cantilever, like a miniature diving board, tap or glide over a surface, sensing the faint forces that pull it closer or push it away. Every deflection is recorded and turned into an image. It is as if we have created a mechanical fingertip, so exquisitely sensitive that it can feel when a single molecule is in its path. These machines are not just instruments, they are lanterns. Small technological lanterns held up against the immense darkness of the invisible, revealing that there is structure there, pattern there, a whole architecture beneath the surface of what we know. Then there are the electron microscopes. Instead of using light, they use beams of electrons, which have much shorter wavelengths, and so can slip between the gaps that light cannot resolve. In a transmission electron microscope, a thin slice of material is placed in the path of these electrons. Some pass through, some are scattered, and from that pattern we reconstruct an image of the inner arrangement at scales unimaginable by ordinary sight. The pictures that emerge, rows of atoms, ordered and repeating, or amorphous tangles of proteins, or tiny viruses resting like curled seeds, are not colored the way our eyes would see them. They are often grayscale, eerie, luminous, like moonlight photographs of a tiny alien city. But you don't need to remember the names of these tools. You don't need to carry their acronyms into sleep. All you need is the feeling they give, that the darkness we once assumed was empty is in fact full of detail. That human curiosity has found ways to gently, respectfully, peer into what was once beyond us. That the nanoscale is not just a guess, but a landscape we have touched with careful, patient hands. As we linger in this quietly small world, another shift in perspective comes into view. the way the rules themselves begin to change. At your normal size, you are ruled by gravity. You feel its pull constantly, the weight of your body against the mattress, the heaviness of your head on the pillow, the way objects fall when you drop them. Strength is something that must push against weight. Motion is something that must overcome friction and inertia. But as we shrink, gravity loses its voice. At the nanoscale, a tiny fragment of dust has so little mass that gravity's tug on it is almost nothing. Instead, other forces step up and take the lead. Forces of attraction between molecules, the pull of electric charges, the gentle but incessant jostling of thermal motion. Stickiness becomes stronger than weight. Imagine a small speck of dust clinging to your fingertip. At your size, it seems trivial, almost weightless, easily brushed away. But if you were as small as the dust itself, the story would be different. The surface you rest on would stretch away unevenly in all directions, full of ridges and cliffs and valleys. The tiny electrical forces between the atoms in your dust-speck body and the atoms in the surface would bind you so firmly that leaping away would feel like trying to escape the gravity of a planet. Water, too, reveals new moods. At the nanoscale, a drop of water is a cluster of molecules that fiercely prefer each other's company. Their charged ends cling together, forming beads and droplets, pulling into the tightest shape they can, a sphere, as close as possible in 3 dimensions. Surface tension, the phenomenon that lets some insects walk on water without sinking, becomes a dominating rule here. If you were a nano-sized traveler on the surface of a water droplet, the edge of that droplet would be a curved cliff of astonishing strength. To break free from it would require forces that feel enormous to you, even if they are almost nothing to us. We can also feel the ever-present dance of Brownian motion, the random jittering of small particles in a fluid, first noticed long ago when a scientist watched pollen grains bouncing erratically in water. At the nanoscale, this jittering is life itself. Everything is shaken and stirred by the constant thermal energy of the environment. If you were the size of a large molecule, you wouldn't rest. Even if you tried to lie perfectly still, the water molecules around you would be endlessly colliding with you, shoving you in one direction, then another, in a slow, unpredictable waltz. Stillness at this scale does not really exist. There is always motion. And surfaces matter more than insides. As objects become smaller, their outer skin begins to dominate. A small sphere has less volume than a large one, but relatively more surface area. If you break a cube of sugar into many tiny grains, the overall surface that touches your tongue or your tea increases dramatically. This is why powders dissolve so much faster than lumps. At the nanoscale, this effect becomes profound. A nanoparticle, with so much of it exposed to the world, is like a person with many open windows in a house. Everything outside, light, chemicals, heat, has more opportunities to interact. Reactions can happen more quickly. Materials can behave differently. Even a familiar substance like gold or silver can take on new colors and properties when broken into such tiny bits that their surfaces dominate who they are. You, too, are full of surfaces at this scale. Every cell in your body is a little enclosed world, wrapped in a membrane just a few nanometers thick. That membrane is a busy border crossing, full of proteins that act as gates, receptors, channels. Ions slip through these channels one by one, creating tiny currents that add up to thoughts, movements, memories. Each protein is itself a folded chain of atoms, arranged with nanoscale precision so that a small change in shape can open or close a passage. All of these processes, ion channels flickering, receptors binding, Molecules weaving past each other are happening right now, even as you lie here. A vast choreography in a theater too small for you to ever see, but no less real. And somewhere, very far above you now, are the worries of the day. Deadlines, messages, misunderstandings, the tangle of to-do lists and expectations, they all exist at your usual scale, among people and screens and rooms. They have their own kind of weight, their own kind of gravity. It's normal for them to feel huge, overwhelming, as if they fill the whole sky of your attention. But from down here, in the nanoscopic world, they start to look different. Imagine you are now so small that the weave of your pillowcase threads rises around you like hills. A single grain of dust is a mountain range. The tiny gap between fibers is a valley you could walk through for hours. Above all of that, your bed is an entire continent, your room an entire planet, your city a distant star. The problems resting there on the surface of that distant planet still exist. They are not erased, but they are softened by distance, blurred by perspective, like cities seen from an airplane window at night, clusters of light and shadow, impossible to distinguish in detail, quietly beautiful and far away. You may find, as you breathe here in this imagined smallness, that something in you relaxes. There is comfort in knowing that the world is layered in size, that reality does not end at what we can see, but continues inward, organizing itself into patterns of astonishing subtlety. That while your mind spins stories at the human scale, a deeper, older choreography is still unfolding quietly beneath it, at the level of atoms and molecules and nanometers. You are held inside that choreography. You are made from it. Even when your thoughts feel chaotic, the architecture of your body is still arranging itself with calm precision at scales you never notice. Fingernails growing, hair lengthening, proteins unfolding and refolding, cell membranes renewing, synapses whispering. The world grows quietly small, and in that smallness, there is a strange, steady peace. So as you rest here, you can let the day become a distant landscape. You don't have to solve anything right now. Somewhere deep within you, atoms are still lining up into lattices. Molecules are still brushing past each other like dancers underwater. Nano-sized forces are still holding everything together. You can trust them to keep going. You can trust the smallest world to continue its patient work. All you need, in this moment, is to breathe, to feel the gentle weight of your body, and to know that within you, and beneath everything you see, there is a hidden universe of order and motion, quietly keeping watch as you drift toward sleep. Let the room around you fade again, just a little. You know it's there. The walls, the ceiling, the familiar furniture like quiet silhouettes in the dark. But for now, you can let them soften, as though they're slowly dissolving into mist at the edges of your awareness. Somewhere deep inside, the part of you that's still alert, still listening, can lean in gently, because we're going outside for a while. Not really with your body. Your body can stay right where it is, heavy and safe on the bed, but with your attention, like a soft breeze slipping out through a window. Tonight, we're going to walk through a different kind of garden, a garden that has always been here, even on the days you felt most alone. Before humans ever whispered the word nanotechnology, before laboratories and diagrams and glowing screens, nature was already busy, quietly fluent in the language of the very small. Every leaf, every feather, every strand of silk in this old, patient world is a kind of poem written in nanometers. And for a little while, We're just going to wander through this poetry. You might imagine that the air around your bed grows cooler and fresher, tinged with the smell of soil after rain. The floor gives way to moss, and the ceiling opens into a soft grey sky. You find yourself in a calm, expansive garden where time moves slowly, like a long, deep breath. Dew hangs on leaves. Birdsong is distant and unhurried, and every surface, every flower, every drop of water holds a secret far too small for your eyes, but not too small for your imagination. Somewhere nearby, there is a pond. Let's go there. At the edge of the water, you notice a plant, the lotus, its wide, round leaves like quiet green plates resting on the surface. They look so simple from far away, just circles of green floating on dark water. But as you move closer in your mind, as if your vision can gently zoom, something more begins to appear. On one leaf, a bead of water trembles, perfectly round, perfectly bright. It doesn't spread out and soak the surface. It doesn't flatten into a smear. It simply sits there, like a tiny planet resting on a vast green world, shimmering with reflected sky. And as you watch, the bead tilts and begins to roll. It glides across the leaf, gathering little specks of dust, grains of pollen, tiny fragments of the day. With each slow movement, it sweeps them up, as though gravity and surface tension have become a broom. Then, with one last gentle nudge, the bead rolls off the edge, drops into the pond, and disappears beneath the surface, carrying all that dust away. The leaf is clean again, untouched by the water that just washed it. Somewhere deep in the design of this leaf is a secret, a nanoscale pattern that tells water how to behave. If we could shrink ourselves down, far smaller than an ant, smaller than a fleck of soil, smaller than even a grain of dust, we would find that the smooth surface of the lotus leaf is not smooth at all. It is covered in a landscape of tiny bumps, microscopic hills made of plant cells. And on top of those hills, even smaller structures, nanoscale wax crystals. These crystals are like little towers and ridges, so tiny that thousands of them can fit across the width of a human hair. The wax they're made from doesn't like water. It resists it. So when a droplet lands on this double-structured surface, microscopic steps, nanoscopic spikes, it can't sink in or spread out. Instead, it stays rounded, perched on the very tips of these tiny wax towers, like a dancer balanced lightly on the points of their toes. The area where water actually touches the leaf is minimal. Almost all of it is resting on air and wax. That's why it rolls so easily. There is so little friction, so little for it to cling to. And as it moves, any dust or dirt on the leaf, which sticks more strongly to the water than to the wax, gets swept along for the ride. To the plant, this is survival. A clean leaf can gather light more easily. Less dust means less chance for germs and rot. To us, watching from the side of this quiet pond, it is a kind of magic. Yet it's the magic of nanotechnology, perfected over millions of years. Humans study this lotus effect to design paints that clean themselves in the rain, fabrics that resist stains, glass that stays clear. But the leaf never studied. It simply grew that way, its nanoscale architecture written slowly by evolution, like a patient hand carving patterns into stone. As you stand in this garden, it's okay if you feel a mixture of awe and something softer, maybe a bit of relief. The world is full of intelligence that doesn't need to speak your language, full of structures that solve problems silently, again and again, without any attention at all. The lotus does not know the word nano, it just lives it. From the pond, a small path curves away, dappled with soft light. You follow it, feeling the ground give slightly under each imagined step. Somewhere overhead, there's the barest flicker of movement on the bark of a nearby tree. A gecko. It pauses for a moment, clinging effortlessly to the vertical surface. Then, as if it has decided on some secret errand, it begins to climb. Up the trunk, then across a branch, then out to the underside of a leaf. It never slips, never hesitates. Gravity seems to have forgotten it. You know, of course, that the gecko is not using tiny suction cups like a child's bath toy. It's not gluing itself to the wall. Something more delicate is happening. Something that lives again in the realm of the very small. If we were to zoom in, past the smooth outline of its toes, past the gentle curve of the pads, we would discover a forest. Each toe is covered with rows of fine hairs called setae. And each of those hairs, in turn, branches into hundreds of even finer hairs, spatula-shaped tips that end in nanoscale dimensions. At the very end, the thickness of each tip is measured in mere tens of nanometers, vanishing into the realm where atoms become neighbors. These countless nanoscopic tips press close to the surface, the tree bark, the leaf, the ceiling of a cave, even a sheet of glass. They don't need to hook into cracks or latch onto ridges. They only need to come near enough for the quiet forces between molecules, van der Waals forces, to wake up. These forces are not dramatic. They're not loud like magnetism or obvious like static electricity. They are the soft whispers of attraction that happen whenever two uncharged molecules come very close together. A tiny induced charge here, a tiny response there, a faint pull. One of these nanoscale whispers alone is weak. But the gecko brings millions, even billions, of tips into contact at once. Together, they add up to something powerful enough to hold the animal's weight, even upside down. When the gecko wants to let go, it simply changes the angle of its toes, peeling those tiny hairs away, like someone carefully lifting a piece of tape off a surface, one edge at a time. The lizard doesn't need to think about any of this. It just walks. The nanoscale engineering is built into its feet. Scientists have tried to mimic this, creating synthetic gecko-inspired tapes and adhesives that work without glue, without residue, simply by mimicking the split, branching structure of those hairs. Each new attempt is a quiet tribute to the unnoticed genius of a little animal climbing trees in the moonlight. As you picture the gecko vanishing into the leafy canopy above, you might feel a small stirring inside. An awareness that so many of the world's seemingly impossible feats are carried not by brute force, but by delicacy. Not by rigid control, but by an intimate relationship with the very smallest parts of matter. Sometimes it's the tiniest hairs on a toe that let you defy gravity. The path leads you now into a clearing where light seems to gather and linger. A butterfly drifts into view, not in any hurry, its wings rising and falling with unrushed grace. It lands on a blade of grass, and as it opens its wings, the world around it seems to dim for a moment, simply so that the colors can be seen more clearly. Blues that look almost unreal, greens that shimmer as if lit from within, patterns that shift slightly with each tiny movement. These colors are not like the ones that drip from a painter's brush. There are no blue pigments here, no little molecules whose shapes lock in certain wavelengths of light and reject others. The butterfly's wings hold a different secret. They are colored by structure. Imagine, for a moment, shrinking down to the surface of a wing scale. What looks from afar like a smooth patch of color is actually made of tiny overlapping scales, like roof tiles, or the slats of a wooden fence. Each scale is ridged and layered, and within those layers are nanostructures, repeating patterns of material and air, carefully arranged in distances comparable to the wavelengths of visible light. When incoming light hits this nanoscale architecture, it doesn't just bounce off in a simple way. Some of it reflects from the top layer. Some penetrates, reflects from a deeper layer. The waves of light overlap and interfere, adding up in some colors, cancelling out in others, depending on the exact spacing and angles. The result is a shimmering blue that is not painted on, but constructed. A color that can change with viewing angle, like a memory looked at from a different emotional distance. Sometimes brighter, sometimes softer, but always anchored in the same intricate structure. Peacock feathers hold a similar secret. So do the throats of hummingbirds, the shells of certain beetles, the opal stones hidden in the earth. These are examples of structural color, hues born not from chemical dyes, but from the physical arrangement of matter at the nanoscale. To see them is to witness light itself being sculpted by invisible architecture. Like the stars waiting quietly behind daylight, these structures are always there, patient and unseen. When you look away, the color does not vanish. It simply continues its silent conversation with the light, bending and scattering wavelengths whether anyone is watching or not. You might think of all the times in your life when someone's colors, so to speak, have been misunderstood. How often we think of personality as a pigment, something flat and fixed, when so much of who we are is structural, dependent on context, on angle, on the quality of light we're seen in. At the nanoscale, the world whispers. It's not always about what you're made of. Sometimes it's about how you are arranged. The garden seems to open its arms wider now, inviting you not just to observe, but to recognize yourself in it. We leave the wings and leaves and tiny feet behind for a moment, and gently turn inward. Not in a heavy, introspective way, but with a kind of peaceful curiosity, as if you're looking at your own body from the outside for the very first time. It's normal to feel fragile sometimes, to feel as though you're made of glass, or paper, or a thin shell that the world could crack without even trying. But under your skin, hidden beneath every familiar surface, is a deep, layered intelligence of structure, a nanotechnology older than any human dream. Start with your skin, the quiet boundary between your inner world and everything else. Below the surface, woven through the tissue, are fibers of collagen. Each collagen molecule is like a tiny, triple-stranded rope, 3 protein chains wound around each other in a helix. These helices then bundle together, forming fibrils. Those fibrils twist into thicker fibers, and those fibers weave themselves into tissues that can bend and flex and stretch, yet hold together. At the nanometer scale, the collagen fibrils show repeating patterns, bands and gaps where mineral crystals can settle in places like bone. This hierarchical construction, from molecule to fibril to fiber to tissue, gives your skin its quiet resilience. When you press a finger into your arm and watch the indentation slowly vanish, that is collagen and its nanoscale organization at work, redistributing force, springing back, remembering the shape you had before. Go deeper, into bone. Bone seems hard and simple from the outside, but it is far from just a solid lump of mineral. It is more like a reinforced composite material, a nanoscopic brick-and-mortar construction. Collagen fibers provide the flexible scaffold, the rebar. And onto this scaffold, tiny plates of mineral are laid down. These plates are made of hydroxyapatite, a calcium phosphate crystal. They are only tens of nanometers thick, and they align along the collagen fibers in a staggered pattern, each one overlapping the next, like scales on a fish or tiles on a roof. This layered architecture gives bone a paradoxical combination of strength and lightness. strong enough to hold you up, to withstand the repeated impacts of walking and running and jumping, yet light enough that you are not crushed by your own skeleton. At the nanoscale, each impact you take, every step you've ever walked, is translated into tiny shifts and strains within this structure. The collagen stretches, the crystals bear load, and specialized cells respond by remodeling, reinforcing, refining. Even right now, as you lie still, bone is not inert. It is living nanotechnology, sensing and adjusting at scales you can't feel. And then there are seashells. Imagine a shell you might pick up on a beach, smooth, cool, fragile in your palm. It feels like a single piece, a curved, brittle cup of mineral. Yet if you could gaze into its cross-section with an electron microscope, you would see something astonishing. Many shells, especially the iridescent inner layers known as nacre or mother of pearl, are built from microscopic and nanoscopic bricks of aragonite, a form of calcium carbonate, stacked in layers. Between the layers is a thin film of organic material, proteins and polysaccharides, a bit like mortar between bricks. These aragonite tiles are only a few hundred nanometers thick. This brick and mortar nanoarchitecture allows the shell to resist cracks. When a crack begins, the layered structure forces it to twist and turn, to lose energy, to be blunted and redirected. What should be brittle becomes tough. Fragility becomes armor. Your own body uses similar ideas in many places. The layered structure of teeth, the way tendons connect muscle to bone with graded, nanoscale transitions between soft and hard tissue. Nothing is simply solid or weak. Everything is patterned. Even silk, the simple thread of a spider's web, or the shimmering strand in a silk scarf, owes its remarkable strength and softness to nanoscale ordering. Spider silk is made of proteins that arrange into tiny crystal-like regions called beta sheets, embedded in a more amorphous, flexible matrix. The beta sheet nanocrystals give silk its tensile strength. The surrounding, more disordered regions allow it to stretch and absorb energy without snapping. A single thread can catch the impact of a flying insect without breaking, dissipating the force along its length, sharing the stress between its nanoscale components. No conscious engineer drew these blueprints. The design is encoded in the sequence of amino acids, in the way the proteins fold and stick together, in the conditions under which the spider spins its web. When you see a web shimmering in the morning light, with drops of dew hanging like pearls along its strands, you're looking at a natural nanotechnology fiber, finer than anything most factories could ever hope to produce, with that level of efficiency and grace. And then there is pollen and snow. Tiny, everyday miracles that carry nanostructure as casually as you carry your own name. Pollen grains, though often too small to notice individually, come in an incredible diversity of shapes and textures. Their outer walls, made from an almost indestructible material called sporopollenin, are patterned with spikes, ridges, pores, and grooves, each species with its own unique design. At the nanoscale, these patterns control how pollen interacts with air, how it grips to the bodies of pollinators, how it weathers harsh environments. Every time a bee emerges from a flower dusted in yellow, orange, or pale gray, it is wearing a living library of microscopic and nanoscopic designs, each grain a tiny spacecraft for genetic material. Snowflakes, too, become deeply intricate when seen closely. The delicate six-fold symmetry of a snow crystal arises from the way water molecules, with their bent geometry and subtle charges, arrange themselves as they freeze. At the nanometer scale, the first clusters form, hexagonal patterns emerging as the molecules fall into energetically comfortable positions. From these seeds, larger branches grow, guided by temperature, humidity, and chance. No two snowflakes are the same, we say. But all of them share that initial nanoscale logic. the quiet insistence of water molecules that this is the way they prefer to link arms in the cold. In pollen and snow, in silk and shell, in collagen and bone, the same truth repeats. Nature has been a nanotechnologist for billions of years. You are surrounded by its work. You are made from its work. The word nanotechnology can sound futuristic, clinical, even alien. Something belonging in laboratories with white walls and humming machines. But when you trace it back to its roots, you find it in the softness of your own skin, in the strength of your own bones, in the way a lotus sheds water and a butterfly bends light. It is as old as pollen drifting on a spring breeze, as common as snowflakes resting on a window, as intimate as a strand of silk brushing your fingertips. As you lie here now, it's okay if you feel small in the face of all this complexity. It's normal to feel that way. The world of the nanoscale is vast, not in distance, but in detail. But remember, you are not an outsider peering in. You are one of nature's most intricate nanoscale constructions. Every breath you take is filtered, exchanged, and carried by structures so tiny and so clever that they've kept you alive from your very first moment. Every heartbeat echoes through tissues reinforced by nanoscopic fibers and plates. Every thought you have travels across synapses that depend on nanoscale geometry and chemistry. The nanoscale is not a strange laboratory. It is home. So if there is a heaviness in you tonight, fear or sadness, or a sense of being breakable, you might let this thought rest beside it. That inside your apparent fragility, there is a deep, quiet engineering. Layer upon layer of structure, from the macroscale you can touch down to the nanoscale patterns you never will. Lotus leaves rolling off the day. Gecko feet defying gravity. Butterfly wings turning structure into color. Bones and shells turning brittleness into strength. Silk turning softness into resilience. Pollen and snow turning chance into geometry. All of them, and you, written in the same small language. You do not have to master that language to belong to it. You already belong. As you drift towards sleep, you can imagine yourself back in that garden. The pond still, the lotus leaves bright with little moons of water. A gecko resting high on a branch. A butterfly folded quietly for the night. Snow perhaps beginning to fall in some distant place, each flake a tiny crystal whisper. Pollen locked in the dark of winter soil, waiting for the right warmth to rise. Somewhere around you now, the lights are low. Maybe there is only the faintest glow from a hallway, or the dim outline of a curtain against the night. The sharp edges of the day have softened. The world has lost some of its detail, slipping into grays and gentle shadows. You might notice, if you pay attention for just a moment, that the dark is not really empty. It is a backdrop, a canvas, a quiet room where even the smallest light can feel important. That is where we are going now, into that in-between place where the dark is not threatening, but welcoming, where light is not harsh or demanding, but tender and small. We're going to visit the nanoscale world of light and color, where physics starts to feel a little like poetry. You can let your body continue to sink into whatever is holding it. Pillow, mattress, blanket, all of it. You don't need to move. You don't need to do anything. Just imagine, if you like, that you are sitting at a small wooden table in a quiet room at night. The room is simple. Soft walls. A window with darkness on the other side, perhaps dotted with a few distant city lights or stars. On the table in front of you, there is a teacup. The cup is plain, maybe white, maybe a soft porcelain gray. Next to it there is a small lamp, a kind of gentle, invisible lamp that doesn't illuminate the room, only the world inside the cup. At first, when you look into it, the teacup seems empty. Just a clear liquid, still and silent. Nothing special, just like how the nanoscale itself can appear empty from far away. But then the lamp turns on. It doesn't make a sound. It simply begins to shine a kind of light that your eyes can't see directly, ultraviolet, like the secret glow of sunlight beyond violet. That light pours into the teacup, and suddenly the liquid is no longer empty. It's full of stars. Tiny specks of color bloom into existence, scattered throughout the cup like lanterns floating in a clear night sky. Some glow deep red, like embers. Some shine orange, like small suns at sunset. Others are green, blue, violet, all the shades between twilight and dawn, shimmering softly, swaying as if in an invisible current. What was once just clear liquid is now a universe of color. These little stars are not living creatures. They are not fireflies or plankton. They are something more subtle, quantum dots, nanoscale crystals of semiconductor material, so small that they've slipped beneath the rules of the everyday world and into the strange, intimate laws of the quantum realm. At larger sizes, a crystal of this material would seem ordinary, maybe dull, maybe opaque. But shrink it down to a few nanometers, just tens or hundreds of atoms across, and something changes. At this size, electrons inside the crystal become like notes caught inside an instrument. They can't roam freely. They are confined, held in place by the edges of this tiny piece of matter. The smaller the crystal, the tighter the space. The tighter the space, the higher the pitch those electronic notes can reach. If you imagine a cello and a violin, both made of the same wood, both played with the same bow, you know that their sizes shape their voices. The violin, smaller, sings higher. The cello, larger, speaks in lower, deeper tones. Quantum dots are like that. Make the dot a little bigger, and the gap between its electronic states, the notes it can play, gets smaller. When light is absorbed and then re-emitted, the color shifts toward the red, toward the longer, lower energy wavelengths. Make the dot smaller, and that gap grows. The emitted light shifts to blue, to green, to the higher, shorter energy side of the spectrum. In your teacup, each colored star is nothing more than millions of these tiny crystals suspended in water or oil, each with its own size and therefore its own color, its own fracture of the rainbow. The lamp you can't see, the ultraviolet light, is like a quiet musician plucking at them, giving them energy. An electron absorbs that energy, jumps up to a higher note, and then, after a small pause, falls back down, releasing the excess as a photon. A packet of visible light. A little spark, red from the larger dots, blue from the smaller. All of it dancing together in your teacup, like a galaxy held in the curve of your hand. It's normal, when you hear words like quantum and electron, to feel a bit overwhelmed, as if you're being asked to solve something. But here, you don't have to. You don't have to remember the names or the details. You can just let the idea drift through you that size, at the nanoscale, is not just about how big something is. It's about what song it can sing. These quantum dots are not just beautiful to imagine. They have found their way into the world you know. Some of the vivid, brilliant colors in the newest television and phone screens come from them. Instead of traditional dyes, which can fade or waste energy, screens can use quantum dots arranged in layers. Blue light from tiny LEDs shines through them, and the quantum dots convert some of that light into pure, saturated reds and greens. The combination becomes the bright, clear images you see on a display: a sunset, a forest, someone's eyes, painted by nanoscale lanterns humming in carefully tuned sizes. In laboratories, scientists attach quantum dots to specific molecules, like tiny, glowing tags. When they bind to certain proteins or nestle into particular cells, and the sample is illuminated, the dots light up, revealing where things are, how they move, how they grow. It's like sprinkling stars through the body and then dimming the room to watch how they drift. Somewhere deep in a culture dish, or in a thin slice of tissue under a microscope, quantum dots glow like constellations mapped onto the geography of life. And the scientist looking through the lens is both navigator and stargazer, charting a sky of nanoscale lanterns in hopes of understanding how cells behave, how diseases spread, how healing might someday be guided more gently. But right now, in your mind, they are simply floating in a teacup, softly, patiently. No urgency, no experiment to finish, just color breathing in the dark. You might picture yourself wrapping your hands around that warm cup, feeling the ceramic against your palms and watching those invisible lanterns shine and fade, shine and fade. There is something soothing in the idea that light can be stored in such small places, that illumination can come from a crystal so tiny you would need millions just to form a grain you could see. You set the cup down. The lamp slowly fades. The dots disappear back into apparent emptiness. But the story of light at the nanoscale is not done yet. Across the table from you, another object appears as if placed there while you are not looking. A small, simple ring of gold. Gold is a metal we think we understand. Heavy, yellow, bright. The color of wedding bands, old coins, threads in a tapestry. It has a reputation, wealth, longevity, permanence. We imagine it as solid, dependable, almost stoic. But like so many things, gold has hidden dimensions. Break it down into pieces only a few dozen nanometers across, and it stops behaving like the gold you know. The ring on the table is whole, but in your mind, we can gently dissolve it, not in acid, but in imagination. We let it fall apart into tiny, tiny spheres, gold nanoparticles. Each one so small that thousands could fit across the thickness of a hair. We gather these nanoparticles into a glass vial, add a bit of water, and swirl them around. Instead of seeing dull, cloudy yellow, we find something unexpected. The liquid glows red, a deep wine like red, or perhaps a luminous pink, depending on the size and spacing of those nanoparticles. Under some conditions, gold nanoparticles can even appear violet or blue. The metal has not changed. The atoms are the same. But their arrangement, their size, their surface has rewritten how they speak to light. Inside each tiny gold sphere, there is a sea of electrons, negatively charged, loosely held, ready to move. When light strikes the nanoparticle, its electric field tugs on that sea, pulling the electrons in one direction, then another, back and forth, like a hand gently rocking a bowl of water. At certain frequencies, this rocking resonates. The electrons start to move in unison, a collective oscillation, like a choir singing the same note. This resonance is called a plasmon, and when it happens, the nanoparticle interacts very strongly with light at that color, absorbing it, scattering it, turning it into something you can see. Change the size or shape of the nanoparticle, or the material around it, and you change which color of light makes the electrons sing in this way. That's why medieval artisans who unknowingly mixed gold nanoparticles into stained glass created windows with rich ruby reds, the plasmon resonance of tiny gold, frozen into the glass. They didn't know about electrons or plasmons or nanometers. They just saw that, somehow, this combination gave the glass a color that felt deep and alive. At the nanoscale, identity melts a little. Gold ceases to be gold in the way you've always known it. It becomes a shifting palette of reds and purples, a play of resonances and responses. It's the same element, but under a different light, at a different size, it expresses itself differently. Maybe that sounds strangely familiar. How many times have you felt that you were one thing in one context and something else in another? Quiet in a crowd, but vivid with a close friend. Steady through someone else's crisis, but fragile in your own. Our sense of self, too, has its own resonances, different notes drawn out by different environments. Even gold, it seems, is allowed to be more than one thing. Scientists use these special optical properties of gold nanoparticles in many ways. Tiny sensors can be built where the presence of a molecule on the particle's surface changes its color, signaling that something has bound there. In medicine, gold nanoparticles can be guided to certain tissues and then warmed gently with light, helping to target tumors with less damage to nearby cells. In all these applications, the principle is the same, taking advantage of the way nanoscale gold can catch and hold light, like a small, flexible mirror that only reflects certain notes of the spectrum. But here, tonight, you don't have to remember who uses them or how. It is enough to imagine that somewhere, in a quiet lab at the edge of a sleeping city, a small vial of red liquid is sitting under a dim lamp. Inside it, millions of gold nanoparticles drift slowly, each one a tiny orchestra of electrons waiting for the right frequency of light to pass by so that they can sing. And as they wait, the city around them dreams. Your eyes, too, are part of this story of light and nanoscale whispers. Somewhere behind your closed lids or behind your half-open gaze is a layer of cells at the back of the eye, the retina, that spends every waking moment catching photons. Each photon is a single grain of light, a single packet of energy that has traveled sometimes from the surface of a lamp or a screen or the sun itself, all the way to the tiny fragile molecules in your photoreceptors. In the rod cells, those that help you see in dim light, lives a molecule called rhodopsin. In the cone cells, which give you color vision, live other, related molecules called opsins, each tuned to different parts of the spectrum, one more sensitive to red, one to green, one to blue. When a photon arrives, it doesn't knock on the door or announce itself. It simply appears and is absorbed by one of these molecules. The energy rearranges the shape of a small component inside, retinal, flipping it from one form to another, like a tiny switch thrown by light itself. That small change ripples outward, triggering a cascade of events at the molecular and nanoscale level. Ion channels open and close. Electrical signals begin to travel along the cell, then along the nerve, then into the brain, where whole networks of neurons turn that pattern of activity into an experience. Blue, warm, dawn. The same physics that lets quantum dots glow in a teacup and gold nanoparticles turn red in glass also guides the way these molecules respond to light in your eyes. The rules are the same. The scale is the same. Photon arrives. Energy is absorbed. Matter reshapes. A signal is born. When you watched a sunset once and felt something catch in your chest at the way the sky shifted from gold to rose to violet, all of that beauty arrived to you through nanoscale events, photons touching opsins, electrons shifting states, membranes changing voltage by tiny amounts. It's normal to forget this, to take sight for granted, or even to be tired of it, of screens, of lights, of visual noise. But underneath the overload, the basic mechanism is still so small and so elegant. Tonight, we are letting light shed its urgency. It is not an alarm in your face, not a notification, not a demand to stay awake. It is just another gentle visitor from the nanoscale, humming quietly, at the edge of sleep. You might picture, now, that the room around you is filled with an invisible soft glow. Not bright enough to keep you awake, just enough to outline the shapes of things in the gentlest way. Each object, your blanket, your hand, your pillow, reflects and absorbs certain wavelengths. Your eyes catch a few of those photons, and your brain, even as it drifts, makes sense of them. At the same time, deep in the materials themselves, at the nanoscale, electrons and atoms are shifting in response to that faint light. In pigments and dyes, in the lattice of the walls, in the very air, light is being taken in and released, scattered and transformed, just as it has been since before there were eyes to see it. In distant galaxies, light escapes from stars, traveling for millions or billions of years, only to end its journey by warming a grain of dust or striking a sensor in a telescope. On Earth, light bounces off leaves and skin and water, sometimes slipping into quantum dots or gold nanoparticles, sometimes finding its way to the precise shape of a molecule in your retina. Always the same small packets of energy, always the same subtle rules. As you rest here, wrapped in your own particular place in this universe, you can imagine that somewhere inside you is a teacup of lanterns, a vial of red gold, a forest of opsins, all quietly interacting with the light that still filters through your closed eyelids or lingers in the memory of your day. You are both observer and participant in this nanoscale story. You don't need to hold on to the details. Let them loosen, like sand slipping through your fingers, leaving only the feeling that color and light are not accidents, but outcomes of delicate structures and tiny dances. Quantum dots humming their chosen notes, gold nanoparticles singing in red, photoreceptors catching single photons like fireflies in a jar. In the dark around you, nothing is demanding your attention now. Light has done its work for the day. It has carried images and words and faces to you. It has painted your memories and your thoughts. And now, as your eyelids grow heavier, it's allowed to soften into something else. Not a spotlight, not a screen. Just a kind of quiet music, still playing at the smallest scales. You can let that music fade to the background. You can let the colors blend into a gentle gray. Somewhere deep in your mind, the physics of light continues to hum, but you don't have to listen closely anymore. You can simply turn inward, float on the edge of sleep, and trust that even as your consciousness drifts, the tiny lanterns of the nanoscale world will keep glowing, unseen, unbothered, perfectly content in the dark. Some nights, when you finally arrive at the quiet edge of the day, it can feel as if your whole life is a tangled skein of threads. Memories, responsibilities, unfinished tasks, odd little worries, all of them woven together in loops that don't seem to make sense. You might lie there, staring into the dark or into the slow glow behind your eyelids, and feel an urge to reach out, to sort everything, to hold every single thread in both hands and fix it. Put this here, move that there. Control, arrange, decide. It's normal to feel that way. Normal to believe that if you don't hold everything together yourself, it will all come apart. Tonight, though, we're going to visit a different kind of story. A quieter one. The story of how, at the smallest scales, much of the universe simply organizes itself. No supervisor, no checklist, just patterns emerging from the way little pieces lean toward comfort. You can let your body be heavy, let your arms and legs be as they are. No need to move them. Imagine that your thoughts are allowed to unspool a little, like gentle threads slipping from a hand that no longer needs to grip. We're going to walk into the nanoscale world of self-assembly, into the self-weaving tapestry. Imagine a table scattered with puzzle pieces. If you or I wanted them to form a picture, we'd usually hover above them, scanning for edges and corners, sorting by color, trying piece after piece until they lock into place. It's effortful. It takes focus. But now imagine a different kind of puzzle, Each piece has a magnet hidden inside it, or a subtle curve that fits perfectly only with one or two others. When you place these pieces on the table and gently shake it, something strange happens. Slowly, almost shyly, pieces begin to find one another. A corner here, an edge there. Sections begin to form on their own. You're not forcing them. You're not hovering or straining. You're just offering a little energy, a little motion, and letting the shapes and attractions do the rest. This is what self-assembly is like at the nanoscale. Molecules shaped so that they naturally fit together, through charge, geometry, or subtle forces, drifting in a solution until they find their best companions. No instructions printed on them, no external hand arranging them. Just the quiet search for a lower tension, a more comfortable arrangement. Chaos softening into pattern. One of the gentlest ways to meet this idea is to start with something very familiar. Soap. Picture a drop of soap in water, perhaps in a sink filled after a long day, or a warm bath. At the human scale, all you see is a swirl, a cloud, maybe some bubbles. But if we could shrink down to the nanometer world inside that soapy water, we'd witness a small miracle of organization. Each soap molecule is like a tiny character with two very different moods. One end, the head, loves water. It's charged or polar. It enjoys being surrounded by water molecules, who are themselves little dipoles, each with a slightly positive side and a slightly negative side. The other end, the tail, is oily and hydrophobic. It dislikes water, preferring the company of other oily things like grease or the fats in our skin. When soap is dropped into water, every molecule feels a conflict. Part of it wants to stay in the water. Part of it wants to escape. Rather than pulling apart, these molecules find a compromise. They gather into little spheres called micelles. In each micelle, the water-loving heads face outward, touching the surrounding water. The water-fleeing tails huddle in the center, away from it all, cuddled up together. No one tells them to do this. No plan, no meeting, no strategy session. The shape of the molecules and the push-pull of water's preferences make this the most comfortable, lowest stress arrangement. Left alone with a little motion, thermal jostling, gentle stirring, they assemble into these protective globes. Inside those micelles, oily dirt, grease, and bits of what we consider mess can be tucked away. Surrounded by hydrophobic tails, they're lifted from surfaces and carried into the water to be rinsed away. Cleaning, at its core, is a nanoscale story of self-assembly. At higher concentrations, the same dual-natured molecules can form extended sheets, bilayers, where two layers of molecules arrange tail to tail, so that both sides of the sheet present their friendly heads to water. If you imagine these bilayers bending and curling, they can fold into hollow spheres, vesicles, tiny bubbles of membrane, little enclosed spaces where watery insides are separated from watery outsides. This too happens on its own when the right ingredients are present at the right concentrations, under the right conditions of temperature and salt. No one is knitting these membranes. They are self-weaving, simply because of how their components prefer to be. The boundary of every cell in your body is made from a membrane like this. Lipids, fatty molecules with water-loving heads and water-hating tails, arrange themselves into bilayers that enfold the living contents of the cell. It's one of the most profound ways self-assembly shows up, the very idea of inside and outside, of a boundary that can both protect and communicate, arises from the way these molecules arrange themselves. Life, in many ways, begins with a self-assembled bubble. From these simple beginnings, we can walk further into the tapestry. Imagine a long chain of molecules, block copolymers for example, made of two different segments attached end to end. One segment loves one kind of environment, the other prefers another. When many of these chains are allowed to float and mingle, they can organize into stripes, cylinders, layers, helices. Some form sheets that stack into lamellae, like pages in a book. Others twist into ribbons, curl into spirals, or segregate into intricate labyrinths. Each pattern is a quiet compromise between competing desires to be near similar segments, to avoid unfavorable interactions, to occupy space smoothly. Even crystals like salt or quartz or ice are a kind of self-assembly. Individual atoms or molecules, jostled by thermal motion, bump into one another and stick in arrangements that satisfy their electric charges and bonding preferences. Layer upon layer grows, repeating the same tiny motif over and over until, at our scale, we see a solid shape, a cube, a prism, a six-pointed snowflake. At the nanoscale, there is no architect standing outside the building unrolling a blueprint. The blueprint is written in the pieces themselves, in their shapes, in the way charge is distributed across them, in the way they flex and fold. Their interactions sketch out both conflict and resolution. And from that, pattern arises. If you close your eyes for a moment, you might imagine all of this as a kind of fabric being woven without a weaver. Strands aligning, threads twisting, layers folding, all because that's how they are most at ease. Even proteins in your body fold in this way. Each protein begins as a long chain of amino acids produced by tiny machines in your cells. At first, it's just a string, like a line of beads. But each bead, the different amino acids, has its own preferences. Some crave water, others hide from. Some form hydrogen bonds with one another. Some carry positive or negative charges that attract or repel. Once freed, the chain begins to fold, exploring shapes, collapsing and rearranging, until it lands in a configuration that makes the best use of all these little preferences. A comfortable shape. A form in which it can do its job. An enzyme might fold into a pocketed shape that perfectly cradles a certain molecule. A receptor might fold so that part of it juts out of the cell, ready to catch a hormone, while another part winds through the membrane. All of this, again, mostly happens by itself. The information is in the sequence. The folding is a self-assembly guided by physics. Sometimes it goes wrong. Proteins can misfold, forming clumps that harm cells. Nature is not perfect. But much of the time, the process works, quietly and dependably, trillions of times over, every day, in your own body. You don't tell your proteins how to fold. You don't instruct your lipids to form membranes. You don't manually assemble micelles in your soap. You simply provide the conditions, and the nanoscale does the rest. Now we arrive at one of the most intricate self-assembling structures of all, Na. We often hear of Na as a blueprint or a code, but tonight, let's think of it as a story written in paired threads. If you could stretch out a strand of Na, you'd see a long, twisting ladder, a double helix. The sides of the ladder are sugar and phosphate molecules. The rungs are pairs of bases, A with T, C with G, each pair held together by specific patterns of hydrogen bonds, those gentle attractions between slightly charged regions of molecules. What gives DNA its uncanny ability to self-assemble is complementarity. A recognizes T, C recognizes G. If you take a single strand of DNA, and in a solution you scatter many shorter strands that are complementary to different segments of it, they will, given time and gentle mixing, find their matching sequences. They bind, like friends recognizing each other across a crowded room. The energy of those bonds drowns out less favorable arrangements. Scientists have learned to take advantage of this. They design short DNA strands with carefully chosen sequences, so that some parts are complementary and others are not. When mixed together under the right conditions, these strands spontaneously assemble into larger, predictable shapes. Cubes, ladders, sheets with holes, tiny boxes that can open and close. This is the field of Dina origami, using the natural base pairing rules to coax Dina into intricate nanoscale sculptures. The strands are the threads, the sequence is the pattern, the final structure is the tapestry that emerges, not from top-down control, but from local rules. When you look at a diagram of one of these Dina constructions, it can seem impossibly complex, lines looping and folding, crossing and turning back. But each tiny segment only knows a few things: which bases it will pair with, what conditions it prefers. All the larger shape arises from those small, simple rules, repeated many times. In a way, this is how much of life works. Simple rules, repeated, writ large. Cells obey chemical gradients. Proteins follow binding affinities. Molecules feel out electric charges and steric fits. From these small interactions, whole organisms develop, tissues take their shapes, patterns appear on shells and leaves, and eventually, somewhere within all of that, a mind awakens and begins to wonder who it is. Somewhere deep in that mind, the same story repeats. Thoughts gather into patterns. Patterns strengthen into habits. Habits weave into identity. You are not born with a finished sense of self. It assembles itself over time, from countless tiny repetitions and experiences, many of them so small you never notice. Neurons fire together when you practice a skill. When this happens again and again, the connections between them strengthen. Synapses, at the nanoscale, add more receptors, change their shape slightly, alter how easily they pass signals. The old saying in neuroscience is, neurons that fire together, wire together. This wiring together is a kind of self-assembly too. You don't sit inside your skull, rerouting cables, plugging neurons into each other like cords into a power strip. Instead, patterns of activity, what you do, what you think, what you feel, create local conditions at synapses, certain chemicals, certain rhythms of firing. In response, the molecular machinery in those synapses alters their architecture. Proteins cluster. Receptors drift into or out of the membrane. Tiny scaffolding structures grow or shrink. Dendritic spines, the little nubs on neuron branches where connections are made, swell or retract. All of this happens at scales of tens or hundreds of nanometers. From the outside, you see the result. A skill becomes easier. A memory becomes more solid. A fear becomes quicker to activate, or sometimes slower. From the inside, your brain is quietly self-organizing, following the same gentle rules it always has. Molecules binding and unbinding, gradients forming, receptors diffusing like small boats on a membrane sea, drawn toward places where their presence is most stable. At the level of lived experience, you might say, I'm becoming this kind of person, or I can't help this reaction, or I learned something new. At the nanoscale, no one is in charge, but everyone plays a part. During sleep, this self-weaving continues. As you drift into deeper stages, when consciousness loosens its grip and dreams begin to rise like mist over a lake, your brain is not turning off. It is rearranging. Some synaptic connections that were heavily used during the day are replayed, strengthened, consolidated. Others that were only lightly used may be pruned back, their structures simplified. The overall balance is adjusted so the network doesn't become overloaded, so that important patterns stand out against the background. In the soft darkness of the night, glial cells, support cells in your brain, help clear away metabolic waste, pruning and refreshing the space around neurons. It's as if a gentle, invisible grounds crew comes in after the festival of the day, quietly folding up chairs, sweeping confetti into piles, turning off unneeded lights. You are not awake for this. You are not supervising. Yet night after night, your inner tapestry is being rewoven. Strands reinforced here, loosened there, new motifs introduced, some faded ones retired, all through nanoscale decisions guided by chemistry and physics, by the history of your experiences, not by conscious micromanagement. It can be unsettling sometimes to realize how much of you is built without your direct control. But there is a different way to feel about it too. It can be comforting. Comforting to know that not everything depends on your vigilance, that you don't have to grip every single thread. The nanoscale whispers a lesson that is both scientific and emotional. Given time and the right conditions, many things arrange themselves. Soap molecules find a way to shelter their uneasy halves. Lipids form membranes that cradle life. Nanostrands seek out their complements and build elaborate shapes. Proteins fold into working forms. Neural circuits adjust their weights. And somewhere above all that, your days stack into weeks, your choices into character, your memories into a story. You cannot control every molecule in your body, every thought in your mind, every outcome in your life. You were never meant to. You are part of a universe whose nature is to self-organize when given a little room and a little time. It's normal to feel afraid of letting go. Normal to worry that if you loosen your grip, everything will fall apart. But tonight, you might experiment with trusting the tapestry. Trust that your body knows how to heal small tears without you watching. Trust that your brain knows how to soften some patterns and strengthen others while you sleep. Trust that the people and habits meant to bind to you, like DNA strands to their complements, will often do so if you create gentle conditions of safety and authenticity rather than constant force. You don't have to solve yourself before morning. You don't have to fix the entire puzzle of your life in a single night. You can be like a beaker of molecules, allowed to rest on a quiet countertop, not frozen, not forced, just given the warmth and space needed for self-assembly to do what it does. As you lie here, feel the weight of your body against the bed, how gravity and softness hold you in place. Imagine, beneath the skin, membranes keeping their shape, proteins folding, synapses adjusting, DNA coiling and uncoiling like stories being gently read and written. Threads weaving without a weaver, patterns emerging from motion. Order rising from what once looked like chaos. You were part of that order, and also the one watching it unfold. Both the tapestry and the witness to its making. For now, you are allowed to rest. Allowed to release your need to hold every thread. The smallest things are still at work. They will keep organizing, keep assembling, keep weaving, with or without your attention. So you can close your eyes a little more fully. Let your breathing slow, like a tide easing back from the shore. Let your thoughts spread out, like puzzle pieces on a table that no longer need your hands upon them. Somewhere deep inside, the self-weaving tapestry continues, quiet, patient, ancient. And you can simply lie here and let it. Somewhere beneath the quiet rise and fall of your chest, there is a river system running through you. You may not feel it right now. You're lying still, or almost still, held by the bed, wrapped in fabric, surrounded by the hush of a room at night. But under all of that stillness, blood is moving, always moving. A slow, dark tide that never truly rests. If you like, you can bring a little of your attention toward your heart, not to measure or judge it, just to remember that it's there. a steady, faithful rhythm, pushing warmth into every corner of you. From your chest, your mind can wander inward, as if it could gently slip through the walls of vessels and float into the current itself. You find yourself standing at the edge of an inner river. The walls around you are soft and living, a tunnel woven from layers of muscle and elastic fibers, lined on the inside with a smooth, delicate layer of cells. Endothelial cells, like tiles polished by time, guiding the flow. The river is thick and crimson, not like water, but like a suspension of tiny worlds. Red blood cells drift past, millions upon millions of them, shaped like soft discs with dimples, flexible and tireless. They carry oxygen, little breaths of the outside world, tucked into molecules of hemoglobin, releasing them where they're needed, picking up carbon dioxide in return. White blood cells move more slowly, like thoughtful guardians. Platelets float by in small, irregular shapes, ready to gather at the first sign of a tear. Plasma, the pale, liquid part of the blood, carries salts and nutrients, hormones and signals, so many unspoken messages traveling silently through you. Everything moves with unhurried purpose. Now, in this intimate landscape, we're going to look for something smaller, things your eyes could never see. A different kind of traveler in the blood, tiny helpers fashioned by human hands, made to work alongside the old rhythms of your body. Nanomedicine. Not as a cold, technical word, but as a kind of soft, invisible medicine. Small boats carried by this inner tide, heading toward places hands and scalpels cannot easily reach. Imagine, for a moment, that in the plasma of this vessel there are tiny specks drifting along. So small that even compared to a blood cell, they are like grains of dust in front of a mountain. Nanoparticles. You can think of each one as a little boat, crafted for a specific journey. Some are made from fats, lipids, very much like the molecules that form the membranes of your cells. When these lipids are placed in water, they don't just scatter randomly. We've talked before about how some molecules have two personalities, a head that loves water, a tail that flees from it. In the bloodstream, these dual-natured lipids arrange themselves into spheres, just as they do in soap and in cell membranes. But here, the sphere has an interior. The water-fearing tails turn inward, facing each other, while the water-loving heads face the surrounding blood. What you get is a liposome, a tiny bubble of fat, hollow in the middle. In that hollow center, you can place a fragile medicine, maybe a drug that would get broken down too quickly if it were floating bare in the blood. Maybe something that would irritate healthy tissue if it touched everything at once. The liposome wraps around it like a protective shell, a small boat with its cargo tucked safely inside. As the blood flows, these boats are carried along, bumping gently against red cells and proteins, drifting through large vessels and then into finer and finer branches of the circulatory tree. You might imagine yourself shrinking further now, down to the size of one of these liposomes. The roar of the bloodstream becomes a muffled, slow push. The big red cells loom like passing moons. You feel the constant, random nudges from water molecules, the Brownian dance, shaking you gently in every direction. You are not steering. You are being carried. But your boat has been given some helpful instructions, written not in ink, but in chemistry. Some nanoparticles wear cloaks. Out in the blood, there is a vigilant system of defense. Proteins patrol, binding to things that look strange. Immune cells inspect particles, deciding whether they belong or not. It's a wise and necessary suspicion. It keeps you safe from invaders. But sometimes, the body's protectiveness makes it hard to deliver medicine where it's needed. Nanomedicine has learned to respect this and to work with it instead of always fighting it. One way is through disguise. Certain nanoparticles are coated with long, flexible chains of harmless molecules, often types of polymers or sugar-like structures. They form a soft, fuzzy cloud around the particle, a kind of camouflage that makes it less likely to be flagged and cleared away quickly. You can imagine these cloaks as misty auras around each tiny boat. They blur its edges, make it look more like the surrounding proteins and molecules, less like something foreign. The body's watchful cells see them drifting by and often allow them to pass. Other nanoparticles wear not cloaks, but badges. On their surfaces, scientists attach special molecules, fragments of antibodies, small pieces of protein, or little clusters of sugar that are recognized by certain cells. These are like keys, shaped to fit locks that are more common on particular tissues, maybe the blood vessels of a tumor, or the cells of an inflamed joint, or a region of the liver or brain. When those nanoparticles drift close to their target tissue, these molecular keys can bind to the matching locks, not all at once, not perfectly, but often enough that more of the medicine accumulates where it's most needed, and less washes aimlessly through the rest of the body. It's like releasing a flock of homing birds into the sky, and knowing that more of them will find their way back to a familiar tree, guided not by conscious thought, but by quiet instincts written into their wings. Now imagine that upstream there is a region of tissue that has grown needy and disordered. A tumor, perhaps. We will speak of it softly, without dramatizing, because illness is already heavy enough in the mind. Tumors often ask for more blood. They send chemical signals that coax new vessels to grow toward them, seeking nourishment. These hastily made vessels can be leaky, their walls not as tight as those in healthy tissue. At the nanoscale, those leaks are like little gaps between the tiles of the vessel wall. To a large cell, they are still narrow. But to a tiny nanoparticle, they are wide enough to slip through. So as the blood flows past this disordered place, some of the nanoparticles, especially those designed with the right size and surface, drift out through these gaps into the tumor's neighborhood. Once there, the fluid around the tumor doesn't clear as quickly as in healthy tissue. The nanoparticles can linger, like small boats caught in a quiet eddy. This phenomenon has a technical name in textbooks, but you don't need it tonight. It is enough to picture this, that by simply existing at the right size, at the right scale, tiny medicine boats can find their way more often into the places where growth has gone awry. If those boats are liposomes, they might melt gently into the outer membranes of tumor cells, releasing their cargo inside. If they are made from other clever materials, they might slowly leak their drug, or release it in response to a trigger, a change in pH, a specific enzyme that's more active in the tumor environment. The goal always is the same: to hurt less of what is healthy, to concentrate help where it is most needed. We often think of medicine as something that must be strong, blunt, overwhelming. Nanomedicine suggests another way: small, patient, precise. Like placing tiny, carefully shaped pebbles into a stream so that the water begins to carve a new path around a rock rather than blasting the whole riverbed apart. Nanoparticles are not only couriers of drugs. Some are lanterns. In another vessel, not far from where the medicine boats are drifting, there are particles whose job is simply to glow when called upon. They may be made of materials that respond to magnetic fields, or to certain wavelengths of light, or to the presence of radioactive tracers that emit signals detectable by special scanners. Some are even quantum dots, like the little colored stars we imagined in a teacup, but now designed to be safe and stable inside the body. In imaging, these nanoparticles are like tiny tags, markers placed on or near specific cells or molecules. When a person is placed in an MRI machine, or a PET scanner, or another kind of imaging device, those tags respond. They might change the way nearby water molecules behave in a magnetic field, making certain tissues show up more brightly. They might emit faint gamma rays that a scanner can detect, mapping out where they've spread. They might fluoresce under particular lights, revealing the outlines of structures that were once opaque to us. To the person lying still, even more still than you are now, inside that whirring machine, it might all feel abstract, loud, clinical. But at the nanoscale, what's happening is almost tender, tiny lights, gently making themselves known, so that doctors can see inside more clearly, without cutting, without probing, without pain. It's as if someone has turned up the stars in an inner sky, so that regions that were once shadowy, an organ, a cluster of cells, a worn patch of tissue, can be seen in sharper relief. These nano-lanterns help answer questions. Where has this disease traveled? Is this treatment reaching the right place? How is the body's internal landscape changing over time? Behind each question, there are people, scientists, doctors, nurses, patients, hoping that clearer vision can mean gentler interventions, less guesswork, more peace. All of this, the boats, the cloaks, the badges, the lanterns, might sound intricate and distant from your life as you lie here in the dark. But at its heart, nanomedicine is not a foreign intrusion into your body's wisdom. It is an extension of something you already do, all the time. Because somewhere deep in you, countless nanoscale systems are already at work, healing and protecting, without any human invention at all. Your immune cells, for example, are constantly patrolling. Antibodies, those Y-shaped proteins, bind to foreign particles with astonishing specificity. Each antibody's arms are like tiny hands, with a shape that fits a particular antigen, the way a puzzle piece fits its neighbors. When an antibody binds, it does more than just hold. It marks. It tells other immune cells, here, this doesn't belong. And they respond, engulfing, digesting, neutralizing, through processes that depend on receptors and ligands, on nanoscale interactions between proteins and membranes. When you heal from a cut or an infection, what you feel as getting better is the large-scale result of countless little dances. Signaling molecules released, receptors activated, gene expression shifting, cells dividing. Every step involves nanometer-scale events, proteins changing shape, DNA being copied and checked, membranes budding and fusing. Proteins wander through your cells, searching for damage in DNA strands, like tiny editors in a library. When they find a mismatch or a break, they enlist other molecules. Together, they cut, patch, and restitch the genetic text, often before any harm is done. These repair processes happen thousands, even millions of times a day, quietly protecting you from errors. Membranes in your cells, those same self-assembled bilayers of lipids, constantly repair small tears, merge with vesicles to release or uptake materials, and adjust their composition to stay fluid and functional. Little machine-like proteins hop along their surfaces, pumping ions in and out, keeping electrical balances that underpin muscle function, thought, and sensation. In your bloodstream, platelets bump along until they sense a rough, injured patch in a vessel wall. Then, they change shape, become sticky, and start together, calling more proteins to form a mesh of fibrin that slowly tightens into a clot. A patch on the riverbank, woven from nanoscale threads. You don't have to ask them. They already know what to do. All of this is nanomedicine too, in a way. Nature's own. The nanotechnology humans design. The liposomes, the gold particles, the quantum dots, the polymer shells, is inspired by this ancient intelligence. By watching how your body already moves things, tags things, shelters things, scientists have tried to craft helpers that can join the choreography without stepping too hard on anyone's toes. At its most peaceful, nanomedicine is just that, placing a few more carefully shaped pebbles into the streams of the body so that the current can flow more kindly around obstacles. Adding a few more gentle lanterns to the inner sky so that we can see what needs tending. As you listen, you might feel a softening toward your own body. It's easy, especially when you feel tired or in pain, to see your body as something that has failed you, or something you must push and control. But beneath whatever symptoms or stories you carry, there is this constant, quiet work. Right now, as you rest, blood is flowing through capillaries finer than a hair, delivering oxygen to cells that have never known your name, but serve you all the same. Nanometer-sized channels in membranes are opening and closing, letting ions pass in a rhythm that keeps your heart in time, your neurons ready. Right now, enzymes are correcting tiny mistakes in DNA or gently guiding damaged proteins into recycling pathways. Immune cells are remembering old threats, preparing you to meet them again if they return. Little lipid bubbles are ferrying hormones to distant tissues, carrying news like messages in bottles. If you have ever received medicine, any medicine at all, it too has joined these rivers, been broken down and reassembled, guided and transformed by nanoscale tools built into you. You are not empty space waiting to be fixed. You are a living network of rivers and travelers, healers and messengers. And so, if there is something in you tonight that aches, or worries, or feels unfinished, you might allow yourself this thought that you are not carrying it alone. Somewhere inside, tiny travelers are already on their way. Some are things you were born with. Some might be made by human hands someday. Nanoparticles, liposomes, glowing tags, joining the journey with care. You don't have to see them to be helped by them. You don't have to understand them for them to be real. All you have to do, in this moment, is rest. Let the idea of your inner rivers hold you. Picture them flowing slowly, dark and steady, through the caverns of your body. Imagine the small boats of nanomedicine drifting along with them, and the even smaller, older healers of your own biology weaving through the currents. Together, they are tending to you. And you, here at the surface, can finally let your shoulders drop a little more. Let your jaw soften. Let your breath lengthen, like a tide ebbing out from a quiet shore. The work of healing, on all its scales, does not happen only when you are wide awake and in control. So much of it happens exactly like this, in stillness, in sleep, in the dark, with tiny, gentle travelers moving through your blood, keeping watch as you drift further into rest. There is a certain weight to it, a gentle heaviness where bone meets fabric, where your scalp meets the quiet coolness of the room. From the outside, it looks so simple, a shape in the dark, hair spilling across cotton. Maybe the shadow of your profile etched softly by some distant light. From the inside, though, something else is happening. Beneath your skull, beneath skin and bone and protective fluid, there is a city that never truly sleeps. Not a city of stone and glass, but of living branches and shimmering signals. A silent city made from cells and currents, built over years by everything you've seen and felt and survived. Right now, as you lie here, that city is gently glowing, not with lamps or neon, but with tiny electrochemical flickers, patterns of activity moving through billions of neurons, like small waves rolling through a midnight forest of trees. If you like, you can imagine your brain as that forest first. Stretching from the back of your head to your forehead, from temple to temple, is a dense, tangled woodland. Each tree is a neuron, with a trunk, its cell body, and countless branching limbs, dendrites reaching out to receive signals, an axon extending to send them onward. In the darkness, those trees don't sway in the wind. They shimmer with tiny pulses, brief flashes that race along their branches. Every time a neuron sends a signal, a little pulse of electricity called an action potential, it's as if a small spark glides along its axon, leaping from trunk to distant limb. But the real magic, the intimate whispering that makes thoughts and memories, happens not in the trunks, but in the spaces between the branches. Those spaces are where we're going now. If we move closer, much closer, and shrink ourselves down, the forest transforms. The broad branches of dendrites become huge highways above us. Axons are long, slender roads stretching into the distance. Where they meet, they don't fuse into one. They draw nearly, almost touching, but not quite. Between the end of one axon and the receiving branch of another neuron, there is a gap, a tiny, delicate space, about 20 nanometers wide. A synapse. At your scale, 20 nanometers is nothing, thinner than a shadow. But at this scale, where we are now, it is a whole ravine between two cliffs, close enough for a whisper to cross, too far for a direct touch. On one side of this gap is the presynaptic terminal, the swollen tip of the sending neuron's axon. On the other side is the postsynaptic membrane, a small patch of the receiving neuron's dendrite or cell body. Hover here with me, at the edge of this 20 nanometer space. The presynaptic side is filled with tiny bubbles, vesicles, each one packed with molecules of neurotransmitter. You can think of them as little envelopes of chemical messages, each carrying a phrase the next neuron can understand. These vesicles drift and jostle, tethered by delicate protein strings to docking sites near the membrane. Behind them lies a complex machinery of nanoscopic proteins, some that prime the vesicles, some that pull them tight to the membrane, some that will help them fuse when the moment comes. Farther back in the sending neuron, an electrical wave is on its way. That wave, an action potential, is simply a brief rush of ions across the neuron's membrane. Tiny charged particles slip through specialized channels, changing the voltage, propagating a signal. It starts, perhaps, because of something you sensed. A sound, a touch, a memory, or because of a purely internal pattern, a thought echoing through a familiar path. As the wave arrives at the terminal, it brings with it a small change in electric charge that opens yet another kind of channel, voltage-gated calcium channels. Calcium ions, which are kept at low concentration inside the neuron, suddenly surge inward through these open doors, drawn by their own gradients. At the nanoscale, it looks like a sprinkle of bright, charged stars rushing into a dim room. Those calcium ions bind to sensor proteins on the vesicles and docking machinery, like a hand closing around a lever. And then, almost too quickly to see, vesicles fuse with the membrane. Their lipid shells merge with the outer surface, and the neurotransmitter molecules inside spill out into the synaptic cleft, into that 20 nanometer wide space between cells. For a brief moment, the gap is filled with messengers. Glutamate, perhaps, if this is an excitatory synapse, or GABA, if it's inhibitory, or one of many other possible transmitters. Dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, each with its own tone, its own style of speaking to the next cell. But tonight, we don't need all their names. We only need to notice that they are there, countless tiny molecules, released in a puff, spreading across the cleft by diffusion. They drift, bumping into water molecules, into each other, into the edges of the space. Some will quickly find their targets on the other side, receptors. Turn now to the postsynaptic membrane, the receiving side. Embedded here, like intricate machines built into a living floor, are receptors. Most are proteins, folded into precise shapes that allow them to both recognize the right neurotransmitter and respond in a specific way. Some receptors are ionotropic. They are channels themselves. When the neurotransmitter binds, the receptor changes shape, its gate opens, and ions are allowed to flow through. Sodium might enter, making the receiving neuron slightly more positive, closer to firing its own action potential. Or chloride might slip in, making it a little more negative, a little more inhibited. Others are metabotropic receptors, less like doors, more like doorbells. When a neurotransmitter binds, they set off a cascade of signals inside the cell, second messengers, enzymes activating and deactivating, proteins being modified, subtle shifts that can last longer, changing the cell's sensitivity and behavior over time. At the nanoscale, each binding event is like a hand slipping into a glove. Shape meeting shape. Charge matching charge. A moment of recognition. Neurotransmitter molecules settle briefly into their receptors, triggering changes, then detach and are cleared away. Pulled back into the presynaptic neuron by transporters, broken down by enzymes, or diffusing out of the cleft. The message is short-lived, precise, a whisper that never lingers too long. And yet, from millions and billions of whispers like this, every second, the symphony of your mind emerges. Every thought you have, every small flicker of memory, like remembering the taste of a childhood meal or the sound of someone's voice, depends on patterns of these synaptic events. Not one synapse, but many. Not one message, but an intricate choreography of signals arriving in just the right arrangement, at just the right times. The story of you is not written in a single neuron or a single connection. It is written and rewritten endlessly in these networks, in which synapses are strengthened and which ones are softened, in how easily neurotransmitter is released and how many receptors wait on the other side. All of this measured in nanometers. If we zoom out just slightly, not so far that we lose the detail, but enough to see a small neighborhood, we can see that synapses rarely sit alone. On a dendrite, synapses often cluster on little bumps called spines. These spines are like tiny mushrooms or buds protruding from the branch. Each one is a small compartment with its own neck and head containing a synapse at the tip. These spines are living structures. They grow, they shrink, they change shape over hours, days, weeks. When a particular synapse is used often, when signals arrive repeatedly that matter to the brain, that are tied to attention or emotion or repetition, something begins to change in that spine. More receptors may be inserted into the postsynaptic membrane. The scaffolding proteins that hold them in place rearrange and multiply. The spine head may swell, providing more space and resources for that synapse. Presynaptically, the neuron might grow more docking sites, more vesicles, making release more probable. These small changes, taken together, make it more likely that the next time a signal comes through that synapse, it will be heard. The postsynaptic neuron will respond a little more strongly. The path between those two cells has been eased, like a trail in a forest that's been walked often enough to wear the grass away. We call this synaptic plasticity, long-term potentiation, when a synapse is strengthened by repeated or coordinated activity. Long-term depression, when a synapse is weakened, its influence reduced. At the level of feeling, this is learning. The way a new skill becomes easier over time, tying your shoes, playing a chord, navigating a conversation, is reflected in the nanoscale architecture of synapses. Connections along the relevant pathways are tuned, some built up, some paired back, some rerouted. When you form a new memory, the pattern of which synapses fire together, and how strongly, leaves a trace in this architecture. It's not that a single synapse contains a memory. Rather, the memory lives in the collective pattern of many synapses changing slightly, together. Experience becomes biology here, a comforting gesture repeated in childhood, a harsh word said at the wrong moment, 1,000 quiet acts of kindness. All of these, if felt deeply or often enough, are translated into changes in how your neurons talk to one another. The you who listens to this now is partly the sum of which synaptic roots have been paved most often, which have overgrown with disuse, and which are still tender and easily reshaped. It's normal to feel, at times, like you are stuck, like your reactions are automatic, your thoughts looping. But even when patterns feel old and rigid, the nanoscale machinery of plasticity is still there. Spines can still grow and shrink. Receptors can still be added and removed. You are not fixed. You are in motion, even in the places you cannot see. Now, as your body lies closer to sleep, we can gently turn to the question of what happens in this silent city at night. From the outside, sleep might look like everything shutting down. But inside your brain, the night is a different kind of workday. As you move into deeper sleep, waves of electrical activity sweep across your cortex in slow, rhythmic patterns. These slow waves are like the breathing of the forest, entire hillsides of neurons rising and falling together in activity, then quiet, then activity again. Punctuating these waves, especially in certain sleep stages, are sleep spindles, brief bursts of faster oscillations, like clusters of shimmering lights passing through particular neighborhoods. During these phases, synapses are not idle. They are being evaluated. Some of the connections that were heavily used during the day are replayed in compressed form, like tiny, sped-up memories firing through the same circuits that were active before. This replay helps strengthen important patterns, consolidating them from short-term fragility into more stable long-term traces. At the same time, there is a kind of overall downscaling. One theory, the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis, suggests that during waking, many synapses across the brain gradually increase in strength. We are constantly learning, constantly responding, and synaptic weights are nudged upward here and there. If this continued unchecked, the system could become saturated. Too much energy usage, too much noise, too little contrast between what matters and what doesn't. Sleep offers a solution. During deep sleep, the brain globally and gently reduces many synapses' strengths, like turning down the volume knob slightly on the entire soundboard. Stronger connections, those more often reinforced, tend to stay relatively stronger than weaker ones, so the essential patterns are preserved, just normalized, brought back into a manageable range. At the nanoscale, this might mean removing some receptors from the membrane, shrinking some dendritic spines, altering the composition of scaffolding proteins. Many little pruning actions. You can picture small gardeners at work by lantern light, moving through the forest of synapses with tiny shears, not hacking, not clear-cutting, but trimming where growth has gone wild, clearing away what is no longer needed, so that new growth can find room in the morning. At the same time, other cells, glia, are busy as well. Astrocytes, star-shaped support cells, help regulate neurotransmitter levels around synapses, mopping up excess, maintaining balance. Microglia, the immune cells of the brain, survey the landscape, nibbling away at unnecessary synaptic branches, contributing to the sculpting of networks, especially in development, but also in adulthood. The brain's cleansing system, the glymphatic system, becomes more active during sleep too, with fluid flowing more freely between cells, washing away metabolic waste, including proteins that, if left to accumulate, are associated with neurodegenerative diseases. All of this is happening while you lie here, eyes closed, doing nothing. While you dream odd, stitched together stories. While your sense of time stretches and falls, or vanishes. While your muscles are still, your awareness loosened. Inside, at nanometer scales, your brain is rebalancing, repairing, and quietly letting go. It's normal, as a human, to feel you carry too much, too many memories, too many worries, too many versions of yourself that you're trying to maintain all at once. The weight of your own story can seem like more than any one person should be expected to hold. But here, in this silent city in your head, there is a nightly ritual of release built into your very structure. Some synaptic traces fade if they are not revisited. Networks that once lit up easily may become harder to activate over time, especially if life changes around them. New associations can form that soften old fears, give context to old shame, make space around old pain. Even if today was hard, tonight your brain will still do what it knows. Strengthen some paths, weaken others, clear away some debris, preserve some treasures. You don't have to direct it, you don't have to earn it. Synapses as tiny as 20 nanometers across are already humming with their own wisdom. Receptors slip into and out of membranes. Vesicles are filled, released, recycled. Channels open and close. Spines grow and shrink. Glial cells pulse and sweep, bringing chemical messages and removing waste. All of this happening in the dark, in utter silence, beneath the threshold of perception. If you'd like, you can come back, gently, to the feeling of your head on the pillow now. Imagine that you are looking down from a great height at a sleeping city. Millions of soft lights scattered across an intricate map of streets and neighborhoods. Traffic is sparse here and there, busier in some districts, but the frantic rush hour has passed. Now, maintenance crews are out. Street sweepers. Quiet trains moving supplies. Occasional windows lit as someone rearranges the furniture of a room. This is your brain, from far above. But you also know, now, what's happening if you zoom in at each little junction of light. At each synapse, a tiny machine is at work. A living nanomachine made of proteins and lipids and ions, constructed over a lifetime, refined by use. Each one is not intelligent on its own, but together they create something that can reflect on itself, that can feel, that can love and grieve and hope and heal. You. As you lie here, you don't have to solve the city tonight. You don't have to understand every street or every flicker. You don't have to hold on to every memory or every version of who you think you should be. The nanoscale world inside you is already tending to the connections that matter most right now. Some will be kept, some will be gently loosened, some new ones will be ready to form when the light returns. Your only task is to rest in this knowledge, to feel the support of the bed beneath you, the softness around your head, the rhythm of your own breath, like a slow wind moving over the silent city in your skull. Somewhere deep inside, synapses are quietly firing, resetting, and repairing. Tiny nanomachines are humming, turning experience into structure, and structure into calm. You are allowed in this moment to let go of the need to do anything more. The city in your head is still working, even as you drift away, and as it works, you can sleep. And so, like a slow tide returning to shore, we come back from the smallest worlds. We have walked together through invisible gardens, across lotus leaves and butterfly wings, along the edges of tiny crystals that sing in color, through rivers of blood carrying gentle travelers. and finally into the silent streets of your own brain. We've seen that the universe does not end where our eyes grow tired. It continues inward, folding into finer and finer threads, weaving patterns of astonishing delicacy. Somewhere deep in the mind, it's normal to feel oversized in your worries and undersized in your strength. But the nanoscale has been whispering a different story tonight. It has shown that even the tiniest things, atoms lining up into lattices, molecules nesting into micelles, proteins shifting their shape by a fraction of a nanometer, can create mountains, oceans, forests, and you. As you rest here now, the same nanoscale processes we've visited are happening within you. Ions are drifting through channels in your neurons. Proteins are folding and refolding. DNA is being checked and mended. Synapses are humming with quiet adjustments, letting some patterns fade and others grow clearer. You don't have to direct any of it. You don't have to be enough for it. It knows what to do. You are not separate from nanotechnology. You are one of its most beautiful expressions. So, if your thoughts start to wander again, you can let them. Imagine them shrinking, becoming dust motes in a calm beam of light, then becoming smaller than dust, smaller than the limits of sight. Each worry dissolving into a landscape of tiny, patient structures that have survived for billions of years and will keep working gently, even while you sleep. The world outside your room can wait. The world inside you is already busy, already wise, already taking care of what it can at the tiniest scales. Your only task now is simple: to breathe, to soften, to allow yourself to be carried by this hidden, humming universe you call a body, you call a brain, you call a life. You can close your eyes whenever you're ready and let the smallest worlds keep watch.